Let's dive into today's top stories. We've got a lot to unpack. Everything from, well, diplomatic maneuvers to ongoing conflicts, surprising events, even some big policy changes. We're keeping it concise and relevant, just the stuff you need to know.
Yeah, a lot happening on the global stage right now. It's touching on some pretty crucial areas, international security, even tragic events happening locally, and, well, some pretty big shifts in global influence.
So let's kick things off with the situation in Ukraine. There was this phone call recently between Putin and Trump.
Right.
And the big takeaway there is Putin's agreed to halt the attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure.
For now, at least, right?
Yeah, for 30 days. It's temporary. But on the other hand, Putin's not budging on a full ceasefire.
Yeah, that's a major sticking point.
He's saying, look, the only way that happens is if all the allies stop sending military aid and stop sharing intelligence with Ukraine.
So essentially putting the ball in the Allies' court.
Which is, well, it's a pretty far cry from, what Trump's team was talking about with the Ukrainians over in Saudi Arabia. They were hoping for a more comprehensive ceasefire.
It seems like we're a long way from that right now.
And to make things even more complicated, just hours after this whole phone call went down, Zelensky's reporting more attacks.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, Russian drones hitting civilian infrastructure. He even mentioned a hospital in Sunni that got hit.
That's awful.
So basically, he's accusing Putin of, flat out rejecting a full ceasefire. It's definitely a very messy situation.
Understatement of the year.
But despite all this, the U.S. is still planning to continue those Ukraine talks.
Right, in Jeddah?
Yep, over in Saudi Arabia.
Yeah.
And in the meantime, well, Kyiv hasn't been sitting still. They've actually launched drone strikes on some of those Russian oil and gas facilities.
Fighting fire with fire.
So everyone's got something to say about all of this. Germany's Chancellor Scholz, he called this limited ceasefire plan, a step in the right direction. But obviously, he still wants a complete ceasefire.
Makes sense.
And then you've got the UK, reiterating their unwavering support for Zelensky.
So the international community is trying to hold a united front.
Right. But on the ground, it's a different story.
Yeah.
Ukrainian troops are describing this catastrophic retreat from the Kursk region.
That sounds serious.
It is. Heavy fire, drone attacks, major equipment losses, casualties, you name it. Apparently, they're down to just one supply route. And it's vulnerable.
So they're really feeling the pressure.
Yeah, no doubt about it. This whole thing is it's a constant tug of war.
Absolutely. The Ukrainian counterstrikes are showing they're not giving up, but they're clearly facing an uphill battle in certain areas. And trying to sort all this out diplomatically, well, it's like walking a tightrope.
Shifting gears now, let's head over to the Middle East. Things are heating up again in the Gaza conflict.
Oh.
Israel's launched a fresh wave of airstrikes across Gaza.
Oh, yeah.
The reports say at least 13 people were killed overnight. And this comes after Netanyahu's vow to, well, he put it pretty bluntly. He said, resume combat operations in full force. This is just the beginning.
So a pretty strong statement.
Definitely. These are the heaviest strikes they've seen since that ceasefire back in January. Remember that whole hostage exchange deal?
Right.
Well, that's fallen apart. Those negotiations for the second phase, where Israel was supposed to pull back troops, they just stalled completely.
That's not good.
So now Netanyahu's saying this is all about getting those hostages back, eliminating Hamas. But the families of the hostages, they're not exactly thrilled about this.
Understandably so.
Egypt, who is actually a mediator in all of this, they're calling these strikes a blatant ceasefire violation. And Hamas has confirmed that several of their leaders were killed in the previous strikes.
So everyone's pointing fingers.
Right. And from what we're hearing, some of the regional mediators are pushing Hamas to release the hostages in exchange for de-escalation.
That would certainly be a step in the right direction.
Yeah, hopefully they can find some middle ground. But in the meantime, Israel's ordered Palestinians to evacuate a big chunk of the area along the Gaza Strip perimeter.
Uh-oh, that doesn't sound good.
And there's even word from a soldier near the border of a possible call-up of 40,000 reservists.
So things could escalate very quickly.
Yeah, there's a real risk of things spiraling out of control. And with all these different priorities at play, Israel focused on Hamas, the hostages, and then you've got the families, the mediators, everyone trying to de-escalate. It's a recipe for tension.
Absolutely. And that evacuation order, that's only going to make the humanitarian situation in Gaza even worse.
All right, let's switch gears again and head over to Europe. Lawmakers in Germany have just voted for a huge increase in defense and infrastructure spending.
Wow, that's big.
Yeah, they're basically throwing out their strict debt rules to make this happen. They're even setting up a 500 billion infrastructure fund.
That's a serious commitment.
Yeah, it's a sign that things are changing, their priorities, especially when it comes to security.
Especially with everything going on in Ukraine.
Exactly. And there's this uncertainty about the U.S. and their commitment to NATO.
Right, the North Atlantic Treaty Organization?
Yeah, that military alliance. So, this move from Germany, it's sending ripples through Europe. Everyone's watching.
Okay.
But before anything's set in stone, the upper house still has to sign off on it.
Right, there's still that hurdle.
But here's another interesting part. These plans also include spending on aid for countries that have been attacked in violation of international law.
Interesting.
So, that could mean Ukraine seeing an extra $3 billion in aid pretty soon.
So Germany's stepping up on multiple fronts.
Right. And that increased defense spending, it could really shake things up. Power dynamics in Europe, their ability to contribute to security, all of that.
Yeah, it's a signal that they're ready to take on a more active role.
Now, on a much somber note, there's been a terrible tragedy in North Macedonia. There was a nightclub fire in Kokani.
Oh, no.
59 people were killed, most of them teenagers.
Well, that's heartbreaking.
This club, the Pulse, was packed. There was a hip-hop band playing, and apparently sparks from some flares ignited the ceiling.
What a nightmare.
The whole thing's just devastating, and of course people are angry. There are protests happening.
I can only imagine.
So far, about 20 people have been detained. The owner of the club, some former officials. People are saying corruption allowed this place to operate without proper safety measures. There were only like 2 fire extinguishers, no alarm system, 1 exit, and it was locked. Survivors are talking about, being trampled, trying desperately to get out.
Just horrific.
The place wasn't even a real nightclub, apparently. It was some kind of makeshift setup. Used to be a carpet warehouse, didn't have a legal license.
So many things went wrong.
Yeah. And people weren't just killed by the fire, There were injuries from the stampede, burns, carbon monoxide poisoning. It's really bad. The government's declared 7 days of national mourning, and they're going to hold an emergency session to figure out what to do next.
Hopefully they'll get to the bottom of how this could have happened and prevent something like this from ever happening again.
Meanwhile, in South Africa, there's this trial going on that's getting a lot of attention. It's about a missing 6-year-old girl named Jocelyn Smith.
Right, I heard about that.
And the details coming out are really disturbing. They're saying that Jocelyn was taken because someone wanted her eyes and her fair complexion.
Oh my goodness, what?
Yeah, apparently a traditional healer was looking for a child with those features.
That's so disturbing.
One of the mother's friends, a neighbor, testified that, the person who allegedly took Jocelyn wanted her specifically for those reasons.
It's just awful to think about.
The mother, her boyfriend, and a friend, they've all pleaded not guilty to human trafficking and kidnapping. But there are a lot of conflicting stories. At first, the mother said Jocelyn went missing while she was with the boyfriend. Now she's being accused of selling her.
So it's a very complicated case.
Yeah, it's a mess. Hopefully the trial will shed some light on what really happened to Jocelyn.
It's just a tragedy all around.
All right, some more sad news out of Honduras. There's been a plane crash. At least 12 people were killed.
Oh no, that's terrible.
Yeah, it's a really tough situation. President Castro has activated the emergency committee to help out. And a well-known Honduran musician, Aurelio Martinez Suazo, was reportedly among the victims.
What a loss.
Some of the survivors were taken to a hospital in San Pedro Sula. Hopefully they'll make a full recovery.
Our thoughts are with them and the families of those who were lost.
Switching back to the U.S., the final batch of documents about the JFK assassination has finally been released.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming, but, a lot of these documents were already out there, just with parts blacked out.
So redacted.
Exactly. So it's not clear how much of this new stuff is actually, brand new information.
That's true. It'll take some time to sort through it all.
But even after all these years, most Americans still don't buy the official story. They don't think Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone.
It's one of those events that just continues to fascinate people.
And this executive order from Trump, it also called for the release of files related to the deaths of Robert F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr.
So potentially even more revelations to come.
Yeah, it's a big deal for history buffs and anyone interested in those events.
Absolutely.
Now, in other news about information and media, you know how Donald Trump cut the funding for Voice of America and Radio Free Asia?
Right.
Well, the Chinese state media are pretty happy about it.
I can imagine.
They've been celebrating something like 1,300 VOA staff are now on paid leave. And the Global Times, that's a Chinese state-run newspaper, they called VOA a lie factory, said it was discarded like a dirty rag.
Pretty harsh words.
Yeah. The White House, of course, they're saying this is all about stopping taxpayer money from going to radical propaganda.
So very different perspectives on this.
But a lot of people are criticizing this move. They're saying it's a blow to democracy. These outlets, they play a role in reporting on authoritarian regimes.
Right, places where there isn't a lot of press freedom.
And the VOA director, he's saying this just hobbles them, while their adversaries are out there pumping money into their own narratives.
So it creates an imbalance.
And the Czech Republic, they've actually appealed to the EU to help keep Radio Free Europe afloat.
So it's having a ripple effect.
Definitely. It's a big debate about, government funding for media, the role of these outlets, especially in places where there's not a lot of free press.
Yeah, it's a complicated issue with big implications.
Moving on, there's a lot of anger brewing in South Africa right now.
Really? Over what?
It's about the compensation for victims of apartheid-era atrocities. Many of them, the ones who testified to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission.
The TRC.
Right. They got this one-time payment back in 2003. But they're saying it's just not enough.
So they feel like they haven't received justice.
Exactly. And a big chunk of the reparations fund, it's just sitting there. Nobody knows why it hasn't been used.
That's concerning.
A lot of these victims, they're still dealing with health problems, financial struggles, all because of what happened to them during apartheid.
It's a lasting legacy of that terrible system.
And now lawyers are getting involved. They're representing these victims, suing the government for not handling these cases properly.
So it's going to court.
Yeah. Some people are saying that South Africa, without meaning to, sent this message that, well, crimes against humanity, they don't have consequences.
That's a powerful statement.
It is. And it's not just about the money. It's about acknowledging what happened, taking responsibility.
It's about healing and moving forward as a nation.
In Europe, there's another development that's raising eyebrows. Poland and the Baltic states, that's Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, they're thinking about pulling out of a treaty.
Which treaty?
The Ottawa Treaty, the one that bans anti-personnel landmines.
Wow, that's a big deal.
They're saying it's all because of Russia, the threat from Russia and Belarus. They need to be able to defend NATO's eastern flank.
So they feel like they need more options.
Yeah, they're prioritizing their own security, but they're also saying, look, we're still committed to international humanitarian laws.
So trying to walk a fine line.
Exactly. But there's this catch, this article in the treaty that says you can't withdraw if you're at war.
Oh, so that complicates things.
And on top of all that, the UN is saying that Ukraine is now the most mined country in the world.
So it's a very complex and sensitive issue.
All right, let's move on to something a little less heavy.
Please.
There was this collision in the North Sea, a tanker and a cargo ship.
Oh, no. Was anyone hurt?
Yeah, one crew member from the cargo ship is missing, presumed dead, and the captain's been charged with manslaughter.
That's terrible.
But here's the thing. The co-owners of the tanker, they're praising their crew for their bravery. Apparently, they acted quickly, which helps save lives and limit the environmental damage.
So real heroes in a dangerous situation.
Yeah, they deserve recognition. But there was some environmental impact. The cargo ship was carrying these tiny plastic pellets, and they spilled into the sea. They're washing up on beaches in the UK now.
Oh, no, that's not good.
It's another reminder of how interconnected things are. An accident in the North Sea can end up affecting a completely different country.
And how important it is to protect our oceans.
Now, for a story about, well, the challenges of working in extreme environments, there's been an alleged assault at a research station in Antarctica.
Seriously?
Yeah, it's a South African-run base. Apparently, there was a physical altercation between two scientists.
Wow, that's unexpected.
It's pretty shocking. And it came after some reports of inappropriate behavior. So the government, they jumped into action. They've got this whole response plan, and they're investigating allegations of sexual harassment. But they're denying any sexual assault.
So trying to get to the bottom of what happened.
Right. Apparently, the person who allegedly did this is really remorseful, has apologized. But, psychologists are saying that being isolated for so long, it can really make things worse, amplify conflicts.
That's like being stuck in a pressure cooker.
Exactly. It highlights the unique challenges of working in a place like Antarctica.
Absolutely.
All right, on to some lighter news. Prime Minister Narendra Modi of India, he's joined Truth Social.
Truth Social.
Yeah, that social media platform owned by Donald Trump.
Oh, right. The one that's supposed to be like X.
Exactly, formerly Twitter.
Interesting move.
Yeah, it's getting a lot of attention. And speaking of Truth Social, well, The Trump Media and Technology Group, they own it, and they've reported some pretty big losses this year.
Despite all the hype.
Yeah, even though they have a huge market valuation.
So things aren't all rosy over there.
Let's move on to some royal news. King Charles had a meeting with Canada's new Prime Minister, Mark Carney.
Oh, right, at Buckingham Palace.
Yep. And people are seeing this as a gesture of support for Canada.
Because of the tensions with the U.S.
Exactly. There's been some friction there lately. And the king's been doing these little things, wearing Canadian medals, referencing Canadian symbols.
So sending a message.
But Canadians are divided. Some think it's great. Others want him to be more outspoken in defense of Canada.
So they want him to take a stronger stance against Trump.
And get this, Carney's first foreign trip. He's going to Europe, then to Canada's Arctic, not the U.S.
Interesting.
His focus is all about finance, security, and reaffirming Canada's sovereignty in the Arctic.
So it's a pretty clear signal of his priorities.
All right, back to the U.S. Trump's been using a really old law to deport people. It's called the Alien Enemies Act.
Alien Enemies Act. That sounds ancient.
It is. Goes all the way back to 1798. It was meant for, dealing with citizens of enemy nations during wartime.
And he's using it now.
Yeah, he's using it to deport over 200 Venezuelans. They're alleged gang members. He sent them to El Salvador.
Wow, that's a bold move.
Trump's saying that this Venezuelan gang, Tren de Aragua, is a threat to U.S. territory, calling them predatory.
And human rights groups.
They're not happy about it. They're criticizing the whole thing. This law, it gives the president a lot of power to deport people without going through the usual process.
So it's controversial.
Definitely. And this Tren de Aragua gang, they're pretty notorious. Started in prison in Venezuela, but they've become a big transnational criminal organization.
So they've spread to other countries.
Yeah, including the U.S. They're involved in all sorts of illegal activities. Trump's actually declared them a foreign terrorist organization.
So he's taking them seriously.
Absolutely. They may not be as big as some cartels, but they have a reputation for brutality.
So using a big hammer to deal with them?
Yeah. And, this whole thing brings up a lot of questions about immigration policy, executive power, the reach of the U.S. government.
Lots to think about there.
In some more positive news, there's been a thaw in relations between Bangladesh and Pakistan.
Oh, that's good to hear.
Yeah, after decades of tension, it seems like things are finally getting better.
What brought about this change?
There have been some political shifts in Bangladesh, and now they're restarting direct trade, reviving military contacts, making it easier for people to get visas.
So a lot of positive steps.
But India is watching all this very closely.
They're probably a little nervous.
Yeah, they've got their own history with Pakistan, and they're worried about these two countries teaming up against them.
So it could shift the power dynamic in the region.
Absolutely. Some analysts are even saying that this is a strategic move by Bangladesh and Pakistan to counter India's influence.
So a lot of geopolitical maneuvering going on.
And finally, we've got President Trump making some claims about President Biden.
Oh boy, what now?
He's saying that a bunch of Biden's pardons aren't valid.
Why is that?
Because they were signed with an auto pin.
An auto pin?
A machine that copies a signature.
Oh, so he's saying they're not real signatures.
Right. But he hasn't shown any evidence to back this up. And there are official photos of Biden signing pardons by hand.
So it seems like a baseless claim.
Yeah, legal experts are saying that auto pin signatures on official documents, including pardons, are perfectly legal.
It's been done before.
Right. Even Trump used an auto pin sometimes.
So it seems like he's just stirring the pot.
It's also incredibly rare for a president to try and revoke a previous president's pardon.
And it would probably face legal challenges.
Yeah, it would be a big mess.
So likely just a political stunt.
Well, that wraps up our whirlwind tour of today's global headlines. We've covered a lot, and it's clear that the world's a pretty complicated place right now.
Lots of moving parts.
As always, I encourage you to dig deeper into the stories that pique your interest. Keep asking questions, stay curious, and stay informed.
Absolutely. Thanks for listening, everyone.
See you next time.